I was just reading the fourth volume of Abai by IERES, and there, it's really surprising. He describes a pandemic. He describes actually a cholera epidemic in Kazakhstan, at the time, and Abai was actually helping to fight this epidemic, by working with regular people and so on. It could have been written yesterday. So I worked on the book for a long time. I worked on it for 8 years, and I started just by general. I just had a general knowledge about what Kazakhstan cinema was about, and then went deeper and deeper. And then when I came across some archival resources and some rare films that are rarely shown, that are rarely seen, I could see that I think this history needs to be written in a very specific manner in order to do it justice. And so I first wanted to write a history of Kazakhstan cinema from the beginnings in the 1920s until today. But that became too big. I mean, the book is long anyway. It's 450 pages. So that will be another volume about the cinema of independence, which is really a different book then. Show that in this book, right? So first the development, from the early films from Aman Gildi, and so on, and then to the more dramatic films of the 1960s, and then to the crisis of the 1980s and so on, but also show the continuity of that culture, right? The continuity of that cinema, and also the interaction between the different arts, right? So that these artists are all members of one culture. They're all together in one culture, and cinema is part of it. But so is music, so is literature, so is theater, and so on. And that I found very, very interesting, and that's what the book is all about. So if I may show it here, so you can see the picture that is on the cover is from Kuzhibek. And again, Kuzhibek is a film that was made in the late 1960s. And of course, it is a very un-Soviet film. It was made in the Soviet Union, but it's completely Kazakh. There's nothing Soviet in it, nothing communist, nothing from the Communist Party. It's completely Kazakh. And Kazakhstanis still love that film, right? They love the actors and actresses. They love the music, the story itself, and so on. And that's something I wanted to actually portray in that book. Well, I have to say that I spent some years of my childhood in the Soviet Union. I'm originally from Germany, but my parents moved to Russia in 1969. So I was a little boy there, and I attended a Russian school. And not far from where I lived, there was a movie theater that was called Kazakhstan. And so I remember that, I went there regularly. I was always interested in movies. And I remember that I watched a film there. In Russian, it's called Konets Atamana, which is The End of the Ataman by Shaken Aymanov. Of course, in those days, I didn't know who Shaken Aymanov was. I didn't know that this film was actually from Kazakhstan or anything specific about it. But I remember that I was excited about that film. And so this is my earliest memory of Kazakhstani cinema or Kazakh cinema. And so that's like 50 years ago, right? So that's quite some time ago. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a historian. What can I actually contribute? And since my field is literature and film, I thought I'll go a little more deeper into Kazakhstani cinema. And that became a real fascinating topic, I have to say. And so both in regards to modern Kazakhstani films, like Darizhan Amirbayev and others. But also then the older ones, right? The films from the 1950s and the 1960s. So I began to research that, and that turned out to be a real interesting field. And I went to Almaty and conducted interviews with a number of directors, Adilkhan Yerzhanov, Zhana Isabaeva, who actually came also here and gave talks in our institute. And since you asked about Central Asia and maybe general cinema, I have to say that while I have found many interesting films from Kyrgyzstan, from Uzbekistan, still the ones from Kazakhstan, for me personally, were the most interesting ones. So I found them to be beautiful, aesthetically fascinating, and so this was a natural interest. I didn't have to force myself to do that. This was something that simply brought me closer to Kazakhstan. A strange aspect was that many Kazakhstanis actually did not really know that much about Kazakhstani cinema. They liked other films, right? So they thought, oh, we don't have much of this, of that. And I thought, no. You have actually a very interesting cinema. And I mentioned some films, and I mean, everybody has seen My Name is Koja. Everybody has seen that film, right?
Кожа. Измените две буквы, и получится куже. А это по-казахски. Каша-размазня. Ну, разве я похож на размазню? В общем, когда меня так называют, я спуска не даю.
During the Soviet period, right? So from the 1920s all the way to the 1980s, Kazakhstani cinema had very distinct national features. So on the one hand, it was Soviet, right? So it had, a certain ideology and so on, a certain communist ideology that it shared with other Soviet republics. On the other hand, it was very profoundly national in its landscapes, in its music, in its emotions. The main person to be responsible for that is Shaken Aymanov, right? So of course there are other directors as well, but I think Aymanov was the one who really promoted a national perception and a national sensitivity in various genres. I mean, he made comedies, he made dramas, he made historical films, but the Kazakhstani nature of his films is beyond doubt. But generally, I would say the cinema of Kazakhstan is a good reflection of its social and aesthetic sensitivities. For example, the big divide between urban culture and rural culture, right? So the rural part where you have a bus taking people to the city. Other than that, it's very quiet, and people speak Kazakh among themselves and so on. And then you have the urban culture, which is becoming more and more westernized, or is already very westernized, and where people speak either Russian, or now they begin to speak also, to communicate in other languages. I would say the cinema of Kazakhstan is really a great subject, and I think it's a great cinema. I really believe that, both the Soviet part and the post-Soviet part. And in the post-Soviet period, you have another divide that's between art house cinema, right? So cinema that really is appealing more to a relatively small segment of the population, relatively few viewers. So the real, as we call them, film buffs, right? Film fanatics. And so these are usually festival films that have success, international festivals. And of course, we have, Bagazin, for example, who now has become a star of festivals. Yerzhanov, who has had several successful films at festivals. And then you have the more popular cinema, and I'm interested in the popular cinema as well, right? So Nurtas Adambai and so on. So comedies about Kilinka and so on. That is also interesting. Why Kazakhstani viewers, want to actually watch these comedies about the life of Kazakhstan. And in these comedies, you also find problems that you find earlier, in earlier periods, about the difficulty of communication between the city and the countryside, right? So you have the same thing, and this is becoming a theme that both in the Soviet times and in the post-Soviet period is very prevalent. So all of that I found really fascinating, and something that I liked to research, and I continue to actually watch films from Kazakhstan. Sometimes it's very hard to find them because you have to go online, or sometimes you have to be at a film festival in order to actually see them. But I think that Kazakhstan is a very productive culture. I believe that of the various arts, cinema is not the most important for Kazakhstan. I think of all the arts, music is the most important for Kazakhstan, and not just because of Dimash or so, but more because Kazakhstanis just love their music, both the folklore and the modern music, and they have so much to do with each other. And let's say a composer like Nurgisat Lengiyev, for example, right? So he has composed music that is so national, at the same time so beautiful and dynamic. Symbiotic connection is between cinema and sports. So you have of course very prominent athletes in Kazakhstan, boxers like Gennady Golovkin and many others. And I think that films about sports, films about athletes, are actually a very popular, or a very good topic for Kazakhstani films that I think should be pursued. So all of that is interesting for me to observe. I'm happy to discover new films. I just discovered a new one by Yermek Tursunov that he made a couple of years ago, a new film. And so he's a director whom I like very much and I value very highly, and a completely post-Soviet director, So this is a field that is alive and that keeps me interested, and that keeps me going. So I definitely would say, in this regard, Kazakhstani cinema is a great topic to research. Auezov is a great writer. He really is a genuinely wonderful writer. He did a lot for cinema. So many of the best Kazakhstani films are based on Auezov stories, including some of his short stories. But Abai is really about the essence of the Kazakhstani or the Kazakh nation, right? It's really about what Kazakhstan is all about as a nation, as a national culture. And in this novel, he touches upon so many topics of, the nomadic lifestyle, of the interaction with other peoples, with the Russians, but also with other people with whom the nomads whom he describes come in touch. The new urban civilization that emerges, right? So he describes that. And so, Abai is really a genius who has said so many important things about Kazakhstan that are still valid, So for me, it's not just cinema; it is also music, it is also literature, and other fields, and even I would say, the history of Kazakhstani society in general, right? The Academy of Sciences, that all of this is so full of interesting stories, so full of fascinating details, that I keep watching this, I keep researching that, and I still discover new things. Like, for example, recently I discovered a new biography about Shakarim, and Shakarim used to be seen as a very negative character in the literature, and now it turns out he was much more complicated. He was a great poet. He had a very interesting position politically, and so on. So the Shakarim story was new to me, and I want to know more about that. Kazakhstani culture has a very symbiotic nature, in which the various arts are all interconnected. But I think the most important thing for Kazakhstan is to have its own culture and to maintain it and to protect it. and to guard its traditions and develop its traditions. I think that is really the most important thing. So whether a Kazakhstani film gets an Oscar or not, I don't find that really important. The most important thing is that Kazakh viewers go to watch Kazakhstani films. That to me is important. Whether there is an Oscar or whether the film is released in other countries, I don't think that really matters very much. So that to me is important. That not to neglect, not to undervalue Kazakhstani culture from before 1991, from before independence, but actually to see the pre-independence culture and the independence culture as one continuum. I think that is really important.